Someone in your family tree cheated. Not as a moral failure, not as a modern weakness, as a biological fact baked into the species long before anyone had a word for it. And the science of how that happened, when it started, and why it might be sitting inside your own DNA right now is genuinely stranger than anything the tabloids have ever told you about infidelity. Most people assume cheating is a recent problem, something that got worse with smartphones, with dating apps, with the slow collapse of traditional values. But researchers who have actually gone looking for the origin of human infidelity keep finding the same uncomfortable thing. The drive didn't appear recently, it's ancient, and it didn't arrive alone. Here's what this video is actually about. Most people assume cheating is some modern failure, a product of boredom, social media, or just weak character. And there's a whole industry built on that assumption. But the science tells a completely different story. One that goes back hundreds of thousands of years, runs through our DNA, and ends somewhere that genuinely surprised me when I found it. We're going to walk through the real numbers on how often humans actually cheat, why our bodies might be built for two completely opposite drives at the same time, and the one finding sitting near the end of this that basically flips the entire conversation upside down. So let's start at the beginning. The first thing you need to know is that almost everything you've heard about how often people cheat is wrong, and I mean wildly wrong. The number that gets thrown around in pop culture is somewhere around 30 to 50%. You've probably heard it. Maybe you've repeated it. The thing is, that number doesn't hold up when you actually test it genetically. Researchers at the University of Leicester called the commonly cited 30% non-paternity rate an urban myth, and said the real figure is closer to 2%. That's not a rounding error, that's a completely different reality. A survey of 67 studies found that for men with high paternity confidence, non-paternity rates were typically around 1.9%, substantially less than the 10% or higher cited by many researchers. So when scientists actually run the DNA, when they compare what people claim versus what the genetics show, the real number is almost shockingly low. Within monogamous societies, recent investigations of extra-pair paternity rates indicate between 1% and 2% of offspring are from extra-pair copulations, though there is considerable variability between different human societies. Now here's where it gets interesting, because that 2% number doesn't mean what you might think it means. It doesn't mean humans are naturally faithful. It means something weirder and more complicated than that. And to understand why, you need to look at the animals we're supposedly most similar to. Chimps and bonobos, our closest living relatives on the evolutionary tree, don't do monogamy at all, not even close. They live in fluid, multi-partner group structures where the concept of cheating doesn't even apply, because exclusivity was never the deal. The biological roots of human pair bonding actually emerged from a shift away from the polygynous mating systems of many primate ancestors. So somewhere between them and us, something changed. And the question scientists have been arguing about for decades is, what exactly changed, and why? This shift was driven by the distinctive underdevelopment of human infants at birth. The human pelvis narrowed for bipedalism, restricting the birth canal and forcing infants to be born earlier. Infants then required years of intensive investment and protection, an energy demand too great for a single mother to meet while foraging. In other words, human babies are genuinely helpless for longer than almost any other animal on the planet. And that helplessness may be the reason we pair bond at all. Pair bonding also increased a male's certainty of paternity, justifying his continued investment, and remaining with a single partner minimized the risk of raising another man's offspring. So, monogamy at its evolutionary root might have nothing to do with love. It might be a childcare solution, a survival strategy for a species that produces the most expensive, most demanding offspring in the animal kingdom. A human baby consumes roughly 13 million calories on its long journey from birth to maturity. A heavy burden for a mother to bear, even with a partner helping. That number alone should reframe everything. We didn't evolve toward one partner because it felt romantic. We may have evolved toward it because the alternative was watching our kids die. And yet, and this is the part that doesn't fit the clean story, despite a long history of study, consensus on a human typical mating system remains elusive. Across contemporary human societies, monogamous, polyandrous, polygynous, and short-term mating patterns are all present, with most societies exhibiting multiple kinds of marriages and mating relationships. So even after all of this research, scientists can't agree on what our natural system even is. That's not a gap in the data. That's the data telling us something important. Humans might not have one natural mating system. We might have two running simultaneously. There's a theory in evolutionary anthropology called the dual reproductive strategy, and it's one of the more uncomfortable ideas in the field. Humans have a complex and dynamic mating system, and there is evidence that our modern sexual preferences stem from evolutionary pressures, including the simultaneous pursuit of both a long-term relationship and short-term extra-pair copulations. Both drives, researchers argue, may have been selected for over hundreds of thousands of years. The drive to bond and the drive to stray aren't opposites. They might be two features of the same system, both present in the same person, pulling in different directions at the same time. Pair bonding enhances offspring survival by increasing parental investment, but it also risks donating valuable resources to another man's children due to internal fertilization and paternal uncertainty. So evolution essentially built a tension into the system, a tug-of-war between commitment and opportunity that every human being carries around, whether they acknowledge it or not. This isn't a moral argument. It's a mechanical one. The question isn't whether you have both drives. The question is which one wins in any given moment and why. Now, here's where the genetics get genuinely strange, because it turns out the answer to why might be sitting inside a specific gene that about half the population carries. Researchers at Binghamton University discovered that about half of all people have a gene variant that makes them more vulnerable to promiscuity and cheating. Those with a certain variant of the dopamine receptor D4 gene, DRD4, were more likely to have a history of uncommitted sex, including one-night stands and acts of infidelity. DRD4 is also the same gene responsible for alcohol and gambling addictions. Let that sit for a second. The same gene. Alcohol, gambling, and infidelity. In individuals with high repeat DRD4 variants, sensitivity to dopamine decreases significantly, so they need stronger stimulation to feel the same reward. And that need can only be satisfied externally through novelty, risk-taking, and, in some cases, infidelity. So for roughly half the population, the pull toward outside partners isn't a character flaw, it's a neurological threshold. Their brain genuinely requires more stimulation to register the same level of reward that other people get from the same experience. Individuals with at least 1/7 repeat allele reported a more than 50% increase in instances of sexual infidelity. And before you either feel relieved or start composing a text to your ex, the researchers were clear about one thing. The study doesn't let anyone off the hook. These relationships are associative, which means that not everyone with this genotype will have one-night stands or commit infidelity. Indeed, many people without this genotype still have one-night stands and commit infidelity. The gene raises the odds. It doesn't write the ending. So we've got a 2% real-world cheating rate, a dual drive system built into human evolution, and a gene that about half the population carries that makes the pull toward novelty measurably stronger. Here's the thing, though. None of that tells us when this all started. And that question, it turns out, is one of the most actively argued debates in all of evolutionary anthropology. I promised you the one finding that flips everything. And we're getting close to it. But first, there's one more piece you need. The Neolithic Revolution, the shift to farming, around 12,000 years ago, didn't just change what humans ate. The transition to formalized social institutions occurred alongside the Neolithic Revolution, as agriculture created a surplus of stationary resources, leading to the concept of private property and the need for reliable wealth transfer. And reliable wealth transfer requires knowing who your children actually are. So monogamy didn't just evolve biologically. It got locked in culturally, legally, and religiously, because for the first time in human history, there was something to inherit. Property changed the stakes, and when the stakes changed, the rules changed around them. Anthropologist Bernard Chappé argued that the unique features of human family and social structure emerged in a stepwise sequence. Before the first step, both male and female hominins were, like chimpanzees, promiscuous with partners. Then came a transition to polygamy, as found in gorillas. But keeping many mates is hard work. It involves a lot of fighting with other males and guarding females. Monogamy might have emerged as the best way to reduce the effort of polygamy. So the story isn't humans were wild and then got civilized. The story is more like humans kept trying different systems, and monogamy won out not because it was the most natural, but because it was the most efficient. And yet, despite a long history of study, consensus on a human-typical mating system remains elusive. In human evolution, the pair bond became the dominant unit for reproduction, but Homo sapiens has a polygynous bias that drives elite resource hoarding when the environment permits. The system is still not settled. Even in the fossil record, even in modern genetics, even in living hunter-gatherer societies today, scientists are finding data that cuts in multiple directions. While there are many ethnographic examples of variation across human societies in terms of marriage patterns, extramarital affairs, the stability of relationships, and the ways in which fathers invest, the pair bond is a ubiquitous feature of human mating relationships. It's everywhere, but it's also almost never perfectly clean. Okay, here's the finding I've been building toward, and it's the one that genuinely changes the frame on everything we've covered so far. Remember that 2% non-paternity rate, the number that seemed to say humans are unusually faithful? Here's what that number looks like when you zoom in on specific populations. Genetic data from both contemporary and historical populations have consistently revealed very low rates of extra-pair paternity, around 1 to 2%. That's the global average. But one study looked at the Himba people of Namibia and found something completely different. The Himba have an extra-pair paternity rate of 48%. 48% in the same species, on the same planet, living right now. And that number isn't a scandal. It's a data point, because the Himba have a cultural system where outside partnerships are expected and structured, not hidden. The cheating rate isn't 48% because they have worse values. It's 48% because the definition of cheating doesn't map onto their system the same way it maps onto ours. High-quality genetic evidence of extra-pair paternity in humans has only begun to accumulate in the last 5 to 10 years and is focused almost exclusively on populations of European descent. Which means the picture we've been working from, the 2% average, is mostly a Western picture. The full human range is far wider than that. So when did ancient humans start cheating? The honest answer is, they may never have had a single answer to that question. Despite a long history of study, consensus on a human-typical mating system remains elusive. Monogamous, polyandrous, and polygynous marriage systems exist across contemporary human societies, and sexual relationships occur outside of or in tandem with marriage, resulting in most societies exhibiting multiple kinds of marriage and mating relationships. The concept of cheating requires the concept of exclusivity, and exclusivity, as a social rule, came later. What came first was the pair bond, the deep, evolutionarily ancient tendency to attach to one person, invest in them, build something with them. And running alongside it, from the very beginning, was the other drive. The one that shows up in the DRD4 gene, in the dual strategy theory, in the 48% Himba rate, and in every culture that has ever had to invent rules about it in the first place. If cheating were purely a modern invention and purely a product of boredom or weak character, you wouldn't need laws against it. You wouldn't find it in every culture, across every continent, across every recorded period of history. The reason every society has had to address this is because both drives are real, both are old, and neither one is going away. What changed at the beginning of this video was the assumption that cheating is a deviation from some natural default human faithfulness. The science doesn't support that. What it supports is something more complicated and honestly more interesting, that humans are built for connection and novelty at the same time, that the balance between those two things is partly genetic, partly cultural, partly ecological, and that the question of which one wins has never had a clean answer, not 100,000 years ago and not today. If this kind of deep dive into human behavior is what you're here for, there's a video on this channel about how ancient humans first discovered smoking. And it goes to some genuinely strange places about what our ancestors were doing around fires long before anyone thought to call it a habit. That one is worth your time. And if you want to keep seeing videos like this one, subscribing is the move. This channel goes places most history content doesn't. Drop a comment below with what surprised you most from this video. The Himba number tends to get people. The gene tends to get people differently. I'm curious which one got you.